Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kay Hoare, Director of the UK Squirrel Accord Partnership, and I welcome you to this webinar for Invasive Species Week. During this week, there are numerous events and activities on to help raise awareness or actively tackle invasive species problems, and you can find out more on the Invasive Species Week page of the GB Non-Native Species Secretariat website. And if you're sharing posts on social media, you can use the hashtag INSWeek, INNS Week, or hashtag GetInsvolved. So around the world, invasive species are one of the greatest threats to biodiversity and the health of ecosystems. Only 10 to 15% of species become invasive when moved to new areas outside their natural reach, but they cause major environmental, economic, and public health issues. Grey squirrels were introduced to the UK from North America from 1876 until a law was passed in 1937 preventing their importation and keeping. Today, they cause serious declines of red squirrels and damage and kill ecologically and economically important broadleaf species. For today's webinar, I'm joined by Emma Sheehy and James Kennedy from Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels, whose progress on grey squirrel eradication in Aberdeen is enabling red squirrels to return to this urban location, which I believe is very exciting for the residents there. Emma will give us a presentation on their work that will be followed by a Q&A session with them both at the end. If you have any questions you wish to ask, please put them in the Q&A section of Zoom, as it helps me to keep track, and use the chat function to say hello, share any news and events around Invasive Species Week, and for any general discussions. So I welcome you all, and I will pass over to Emma.
Thank you. I'm just going to attempt to share my screen now, so hopefully it'll go according to plan. And just a second. There we go.
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, great. I'll just minimize that. Great. Okay. So hi, everybody. My name is Emma Sheehy. I'm the Eradication Scientific Lead with Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels. And I'm joined by James Kennedy, who is Eradication Officer, and James and I will both answer any questions that you have at the end. So yeah, feel free, as Kay said, to type them into the box, and there'll be time to ask your questions at the end too. So first of all, I'm going to give you a brief outline just of the Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels project and the different areas that we're working in and the overall strategic aims. So SSRS aims to protect the large red-only population north of the Highland Line and support red squirrels in selected areas where grey squirrels also occur. We have a community hub, which serves as a centralised data repository for sightings, control data, monitoring information, as well as a resource library for volunteer and public guidance. And we coordinate the national strategy delivery and landscape partnership efforts and lead communication of squirrel conservation information. In the northeast, I hope you can see my cursor there, we are looking to eradicate the island population of grey squirrels from Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire, and to monitor the East Coast incursion corridor to avoid new introductions from the south. In the Highland Line area along here, the overall aim is to contain the spread of grey squirrels and the Squirrelpox virus to below the Highland Line in order to protect the northern core red population, and to monitor the spread of Squirrelpox virus through the central lowlands grey squirrel population. And then in southern Scotland, it's to reduce the density of grey squirrels in priority areas to prevent replacement of the remaining red squirrel populations and promote long-term control and conservation efforts through volunteer effort and community engagement. So why are we going for eradication in the northeast? What makes it different in Aberdeen than the rest of the country? So there was a single accidental introduction event in Aberdeen City in 1971 into a well-known city park. There was a zoo there at the time. Between 10 and 20 individuals from southern Britain were brought up, and they escaped on their first night. So we know it was a very small founding population, and it's remained geographically and genetically isolated from the rest of the mainland population, and a couple of different genetic studies have confirmed that in the last number of years. If the population was not managed, all of the Grampian and Highland red squirrel population would be at risk. If successful, will be the first eradication of an invasive urban grey squirrel population. It's worth pointing out, though, that there was a significant lag of 40 years before action was taken from when the squirrels were introduced to when an attempt to control them actually began. And obviously, in that time, there was a lot of reproduction happened. The cost of inaction then in the early stages of colonization has been huge, and I think this is a really good example of the cost of waiting before action is taken. So, I mean, the estimate is 1.5 million just for the Northeast alone, but it's probably quite a lot more than that. So I'm going to go through briefly the principles of eradication just to have an idea. And this forms the kind of basis of the operation, our daily operations, and our overall aims, and the actions that we take are based around these. So in order for an eradication to succeed, all individuals must be at risk of your methods of removal. So this becomes harder when the density is much lower. And it's one of the challenges of our urban environment because we actually only currently have one method of removal, which is trapping. So we either trap and use cranial concussion to dispatch, or trap and use shooting in the trap to dispatch, depending on the location. And we're not able to free shoot squirrels, which does make it difficult, particularly as trap shy squirrels are an issue. The next is immigration must effectively be zero. And this is now while we're carrying out the eradication and into the future as well. So the most important thing for us is preventing the population moving northwards from the south. And that will have to remain a priority long after grey squirrels are eradicated from Aberdeen. Don't educate target animals to eradication techniques. This is, quite widely known when it comes to using rodenticide or poison, which we don't use, but it's also relevant in terms of trapping as well, to make sure that the traps are set correctly, that we're not going to, particularly when you're dealing with trap shy squirrels, have a trap that mistriggers or spooks a squirrel without actually trapping them, teaching them that they do not want to go there again. Animals must be removed at a rate exceeding their rate of increase. This is true at all densities and becomes particularly difficult when density is extremely low. Non-target animals' risk must be minimized or mitigated. So we meet that quite comfortably. We do occasionally trap pine martens who are released. They're live traps that we use, so they're released unharmed. Our most frequent offenders are red squirrels, particularly now as red squirrels are recolonizing the area so well. But we release them quickly, unharmed, and they don't seem to have any problem with it in the sense that they come back much sooner than we would like them to. So that's also an issue in terms of blocking our traps. And lastly, local regulatory, social and economic conditions must be conducive to meeting rules 1 to 5. And we're fortunate enough in Aberdeen City, for that to be the case. So looking at our route to eradication, the project started in 2009. On the x-axis, we have just the time, and on the y-axis, it's just a raw number of the total number of grey squirrels captured per year, we're not taking effort into account. And as you would expect, numbers will go up and down depending on effort, depending on environmental conditions, and typically the previous season's overwinter conditions and seed crop will also determine how many squirrels are born the following year too. So we can see in the early days starting up around, not surprising to have in and around 1,000 grey squirrels per year removed. And at this point, for anyone that's familiar with Aberdeen, so when the project started, there were grey squirrels along the River Dee, out as far as Bankery, and along the River Don out as far as Inverurie. So it's quite far out, and it includes quite a lot of quite rural locations. And the method of trapping that we used at this time were mink traps. So they're placed around chest height, usually at a tree. And the number of traps that can be set or live per day will really depend on how many that the trapper can get around. So our traps are checked twice per day like this. And so really trapping was carried out in clusters and areas of higher density and limited geographically by the number of traps that could be visited twice per day. But ideal really when density is high for reducing numbers and bringing numbers down. We also used, if you can see this, this is an El Gecko trap hanging from a tree. So this was part of our trap loan scheme. So people that had grey squirrels in their gardens in Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire, we would place the trap hanging from a tree, preferably where it was visible from the house. And as soon as a grey squirrel was captured, one of the team would come out and dispatch it on site. So these were our main methods of removal in the early stages of the project, and they served us really well for a number of years. Moving forward, around 2015 we moved into trapping in more urban locations. In 2020 then this is a picture of kind of what we've moved on to now, which is a rapid response monitoring scheme. So everywhere that we have that you would expect squirrels to be found in Aberdeen City and its surrounds, and also actually in the south of Aberdeenshire, so at the northern part of the southern population. We have feeder boxes, and these feeders are checked daily by a large number of volunteers. Not daily, excuse me, they're checked fortnightly by our volunteers. And then we check the stickies that go under the lids for hair samples. And as soon as a grey squirrel is detected, we respond quickly by putting a trap out. And the traps that we're using now are these trap boxes, but they now all have Mink Police units attached, which are the alarm systems. So as soon as the trap is closed, basically, the team we all get texts on our phones and through the app saying which alarm went off and when. And then the closest person to that will be able to go and release it if it's a red squirrel, which at the moment is essentially pretty much all the time, or if it's a grey squirrel, dispatch. And it allows us to essentially, when you compare it to the kind of the ground that you could cover with the live traps without alarms, it allows us to be, anywhere that you can see any of these dots there, we could have a trap out at any time and be able to respond to that really quickly if the trap actually goes off. So it's a much more suitable method for working with a low density population that could be potentially quite thinly spread, rather than a higher density population and working in smaller areas. So that's the way that we're operating now. We also in 2021 carried out a spatial ecology study. Devon Fitzpatrick is a student at Inverness College and was funded by FLS. Looked at, we basically put 10 GPS collars on grey squirrels in Aberdeen City and got some really interesting findings. So their home ranges were up to 100 hectares, which is much larger than any previously published home ranges for grey squirrels. And hopefully Devon will be publishing some of this in the near future. This picture, for anyone that's familiar with Aberdeen, might be able to make sense of it. But this is the area around Forster Hill and Aberdeen Royal Infirmary. ARI is here. Ashgrove Road West, and then over to Cornhill, Westburn Park, Victoria Park, and all of these points are just one male grey squirrels. The areas that he was visiting, and he was going to and fro between the two areas, and these are all quite busy roads as well. So it really showed us. At this time, this is 2021, so numbers were reducing significantly. They're higher than they are now for sure. But yeah, so it's telling us essentially how low density grey squirrels are behaving in an urban environment. And we did expect their home ranges to be quite big, but we were still actually pretty surprised to see just how big they were and how far and wide they were moving. So Devon used autocorrelated kernel density estimation to look at male home range sizes and found they were significantly larger than females. There was a preference for woodland habitat over residential gardens or open green space, and for broadleaf over coniferous or mixed. Recommendations from the study included that we should increase awareness of the North East team's goal of eradication through increased public engagement, which we have embarked upon. That traps should be located ideally 100 metres from roads where possible. The need to target woodland compartments that are adjacent to residential areas, which is again something that we are focusing on at the moment. And if the trap loan scheme is to continue to increase efficiency through changing it basically to reflect our rapid response monitoring system, which includes feeders to detect and then respond with traps when needed. And then a spacing of feeders, a minimum of 675. I think we're going to go for 500 apart throughout residential areas of Aberdeen City. So in addition to having all of the squirrel habitat, non-residential squirrel habitat covered, to also have coverage within residential areas, so within people's back gardens, of a minimum of 500 metres between each feeder as well. And we're just starting on that really targeted spatial coverage at the moment, which is very exciting. And where possible, select private gardens that offer connectivity to preferred habitat via woodland corridors, which that's part of our scheme as well. And actively advertising the householder scheme and its goals, again, is something that we're starting on this year, which is really exciting. As up to this point, the trap loan scheme was something that people found out about really by word of mouth, or if they had contacted us with the grey squirrel sighting. We weren't proactively reaching out to people based on their location or our need to be there. It was just responding to people that were reaching out to us essentially. So now we're proactively going out there with our targeted spatial coverage that we know that we need, and recruiting people into the householder schemes, which is really exciting. So looking at how grey squirrel distribution has changed, this map is from 2022, so it's slightly out of date, but you can see the difference in Aberdeen City between distribution in 2015 and distribution in 2022. It's reduced quite a lot. You can see the problem in the south is still there and not changing, so always worth bearing in mind. And that's something that is something that we, as part of our eradication, have to ensure that that population doesn't move any further northwards. So that brings us kind of up to speed with where we are now. So in the last few years, we've been using these feeders hanging high on trees, and a lot of volunteers. So we have between 40 and 50 volunteers in the Aberdeen City, and there are also volunteers in the south as well, preventing migration. And we've used our learnings from the GPS collar study. Oops, and then so I'll just show you the number of grey squirrels that we've captured for the past 4 years now. It's just been on a really steady decline. So in 2020, it was around 500. And then 21, 22 and 23, we just saw it dropping off really. So it went down to 370, 150. Last year, we had just 71 grey squirrels captured. And this is despite a really high effort. So, we've more than 400 feeders being checked every 2 weeks in the city. And that amounts to over 5,000 feeder checks in the city per year. And if you include the feeders in the south, it's more than 7,000. And more than 1,600 volunteer hours just going out there looking for grey squirrel hairs on stickies at all of these feeders. And yeah, so we're seeing a really steady decline year on year for the last 4 years now, to the point that we can be confident that there are very few grey squirrels now left in Aberdeen City. Looking at those feeder stats, actually, so the kind of pinky shadow in the background it reflects the actual number of feeder checks. And you can see red squirrels are obviously our most common detection. So around 35% of all of our feeder checks have red squirrel hairs. And actually, there's only 2.5% of feeder checks for last year had grey squirrel hairs. So that's 2.5 out of more than 2.5% of more than 5,000 feeder checks. And actually, interestingly, we had the same number of pine marten hair samples from the outskirts of the city as we had of grey squirrel samples in the city. So again, pine martens at around 2.5% of overall detections, and red squirrels really showing their recovery there quite nicely. What is clear is that we're in the later stages of our eradication, and there are obviously some challenges that come along with that. It's a very different population to be working with than it was at the beginning of the project, or even in the middle, or even what it was, 4 or 5 years ago. So it's a very, very low density population. And the rate of removal must exceed the rate of reproduction. And that's obviously really hard when there's so few squirrels left and they're really hard to remove. Added to that, in terms of difficulty, is that trap shyness is a real issue. And it does mean that all individuals are not at risk. Excuse me, there are grey squirrels in Aberdeen left that will not go into traps, it would seem. So that means that all the individuals are not at risk, and that puts us at risk of not meeting that principle of the higher rate of removal than the rate of reproduction. So that's something that we are needing to tackle with urgency. Their spatial behaviour has been disrupted as well, so we don't really know how they're going to behave. And even though the GPS collar study was incredibly insightful, there were, in 2021, there were hundreds of grey squirrels still left in Aberdeen City, and there are much less than that left in Aberdeen now. So they'll possibly have even bigger home ranges and behaving in ways that we're unaware of. We're working in an urban environment. There's high public footfall, which means high visibility, and that is always challenging. So we work in city parks, play parks, universities, offices, housing developments, flats, you name it. If there's trees there, we work there. And also a large number of private gardens as well. Shooting on public land, as I already mentioned, during periods of squirrel activity, so in daylight essentially, isn't permitted. And this is a real problem for us. But there are also advantages to working with a low density urban population. So as I say, they're very, very low density. Their spatial behavior has been disrupted. And something that we've observed in 2023 is that it appears that their reproductive behavior has also been disrupted. So out of the 30 adult females that we captured last year, it was, I think, 3 or 4 of them had showed signs of successfully reproducing, and the rest actually didn't show any signs of breeding activity at all. And compared to what you would expect and what we would have observed in historically, that the breeding success in an invasive population would be up in the 80, maybe even up as high as the 90s percentage-wise. And so ours was more around, I think it was 13-14%, which is really quite a dramatic drop in successful reproductive behavior. And looking into why this might be has been quite interesting. So there was a study in 1983 in Mammal Review by Webley and Johnson looking at the reproductive physiology of the grey squirrel. And this was a captive population of grey squirrels and quite extensive kind of area. And what they found was that in order for, so we know that females go into estrus for 24 hours and they will attract males from outside their home range and within their home range to mate with them during that time and in the lead up to that time. But actually, for the female to go into estrus and for those cues to be given to the males, there actually needs to be, she needs to be in close proximity to a fertile male. And it may be that what's happening in Aberdeen is that with male home ranges being so large and with them roaming so far looking for potential mates, that actually that proximity, so female might not be getting the proximity for the duration of time needed in order for her to go into estrus in the first place. So that may be that we're hypothesizing that that is what's happening, but it will be really interesting to see if that is the case. Another advantage is that we're working in an urban environment. It's a highly fragmented landscape, and that actually makes it harder for the low density squirrels to meet. Is a lot more fragmentation in that landscape, so that is potentially actually working to our advantage as well. There's a large number of private gardens, so that means that we need sufficient buy-in from some residents, but not all, in order to achieve the spatial coverage that we need. And they're genetically isolated from the rest of the mainland population, and they actually have very low genetic diversity compared to the rest of the British grey squirrel populations, which is to our advantage as well. And also, we've got the red squirrel recovery is providing a reward in real time. So, you know, there's plenty of people in Aberdeen that still remember a time before red squirrels arrived 50 years ago, when there were red squirrels in city parks and gardens. That's been really important in terms of, getting people on board with the project and trying to reverse that invasion. But also the fact that red squirrels have really been waiting in the wings to come back in as soon as the habitat has been cleared of grey squirrels, and they're moving in really well and recovering really well, and showing that they're perfectly capable of doing really well in urban, suburban environments, in city parks, and in people's back gardens. And yeah, so it's really encouraging for people to see in real time that if they've, for example, taken part in the trap loan scheme and removed squirrels from their garden, that I think almost all of our old trap loanees have red squirrels in their garden now. And even carrying out our rapid response surveys, having started out with still some grey squirrels there, and now some of the surveys are just all red squirrels. So it's really encouraging for people to see that once the grey squirrels are removed from the area, that red squirrels can and do recover really quickly, has been a massive advantage for us. So just on that note, looking at red squirrel distribution between 2009, when the project started, you can see by 2017 recovery is well underway, and they're just continuing. This is from 2021 to recover, and they're pretty much everywhere now. So that's great. What I would say is the disadvantage about red squirrel recovery is that there is an issue with trap blocking and red squirrels using the traps that we're setting out for grey squirrels. So once we have the traps alarmed and we attend immediately and release them. But you might have the same red squirrel going into a trap 3 times in one day. And that trap is effectively out of use then for the grey squirrel that you're trying to lure into it, that might be trap shy. Pine marten recovery is also something that is not directly helping us in the city centre in terms of, we would not expect at all pine marten density to reach a level that we would have any expectation that it would suppress grey squirrels in an urban environment. But what's really interesting is that pine martens in Aberdeenshire, they're found in pretty much all of the woodlands directly surrounding Aberdeen city. Certainly over the last few years, that's really increased as well. And, actually a grey squirrel dispersing out of Aberdeen city in search of a mate is actually more likely to meet a pine marten than it is to meet another grey squirrel, which is definitely to our advantage. And there's potential for, a similar kind of a buffer in the south as well. So it's a very early stages of recolonisation, but it does look like pine martens are recovering in the south of Aberdeenshire and northeast Angus as well. So this is just a little map showing that our city grey squirrels, and then in 2022, this is actually increased as well. I'm just doing the 2023 records this week, and this kind of buffer is getting denser around the city, and yeah, plenty of relatively new pine marten records in the south of Aberdeenshire as well. So that's encouraging in terms of the long-term resilience against grey squirrels in the landscape. So what's next on our route to eradication? Well, we've recently started a partnership with the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland's Wild Genes Labs, who are going to be looking at the genetics of our grey squirrel population, and hopefully getting to a point in the not too distant future where we can ID individual grey squirrels from the hair samples that on our feeders, so we can get an idea then of exactly how many individuals we are trying to trap. And it also is going to help us compare or evaluate how effective our methods of detection and removal are as well, which is going to be really useful. And we are hoping soon to be working with Conservation Canine Consultancy. We did a feasibility study at the end of last year, and so we're hoping to move forward in the near future now with the use of conservation dogs to help us towards the end of the eradication and in the post-eradication monitoring or the confirmation phase. And we're also being a lot more outspoken about what we're doing and proactively trying to recruit people to take part in these last stages of the eradication. So as you can see, we're still in the removal phase. We're at the late stage of the removal phase. How much longer it is going to take is impossible to say. Essentially, it depends on how long it's going to take to remove the last few squirrels. And that really depends on how difficult they are to remove, to be honest with you. So far this year, we've had a much smaller number of detections than we've had in any previous year. And we actually haven't managed to capture any of the grey squirrels yet. So we know there's a minimum of 3 out there. There'll be more than 3, but from our detections, there's at least 3. And we haven't managed to trap any of them yet this year. So we're really at that kind of crucial stage. Once we have removed the last grey squirrels, we will then be in a confirmation phase, which typically in this kind of project would take around 2 years. In this phase, we need to be sure that our methods of detection are sensitive enough to be able to detect any remnant grey squirrels or indeed any grey squirrels that move in. So we want to be using multiple methods of detection, really sensitive methods of detection and very, very high survey effort to ensure that in this confirmation phase that the fact that we get no detections means there genuinely are no grey squirrels there. At that point, we would be able to declare eradication and we would move into post-eradication monitoring, which in the long term will be lower effort than the removal or the confirmation phase. But still with the ability, that we'd be confident that if grey squirrels were to move in, they would be able to be detected and the capacity to respond and remove them is still there. So we had some good news recently. We received some nature restoration funding from the Scottish Government, which will see us through to 2026, and towards advancing the efforts to achieve eradication in Aberdeen. I'll just go through some of the key activities here. So continued coordination and delivery of the rapid response monitoring, removing remnant grey squirrels and defending against new incursion or re-establishment, developing and deploying new methods of detection and new removal methods, which at this point in time is urgent, really, as you can see. Identifying individual grey squirrels via genetic analysis to inform eradication efforts, and establishing the infrastructure and institutionalized expertise for long-term post-eradication monitoring. And our partnership will be expanded to include Aberdeen City Council, reflecting their increasing role in the project's regional delivery as we quickly approach the final stages of eradication and prepare for the longer term monitoring that will be needed. And we hope this inclusion of Aberdeen City Council will set another successful model for local stakeholders and authorities actually taking ownership of the conservation efforts in their region for long-term success when it comes to invasive non-native species control. So this is our new logo board for our NRF partners and funders. And that should be the end of the presentation. Yes, so just to say, we've done a lot. We have a lot still left to do, and a special thanks here to the team, our volunteers, any kind of volunteers and landowners, and those that we've worked with, because we couldn't have got to where we are without all the help that we've received. So thanks very much, and any questions, you can contact us here, and hopefully there'll be some questions and answers now at the end as well. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Emma. I know you say you've got a lot of challenges ahead still, but the progress you've made is really impressive, and it must be really fulfilling to see that your actions are actually allowing red squirrels, like you say, to recover in real time.
Yes, it is.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we'll move to our question and answer session. So this question around it's a triple question. What is the reaction of the good citizens of Aberdeen? Have you or how have you won hearts and minds for the eradication of greys, and what opposition have you had?
I'll take
So,
this. Oh,
James, do you want to take that?
yeah, I'll take this. It was really, they did before the project started, they did an initial survey um, of a kind of generic, kind of across the board, kind of local people, and on a whole, it was a kind of a really positive response that they got. We've had, and because it was a single species, a single event release, we like people could still remember red squirrels in their gardens, so that's also really important. And yeah, so it has been on the whole really positive. You know, really like there's a lot of local households have hosted traps for us, like into the into the thousands.
Yeah.
We've had into the hundreds, even hundreds of people having traps in their gardens.
Yeah.
We did, like, through the trap loan scheme, it's probably about 2,500 or 3,000 squirrels we've managed to dispatch as well, which is really important also.
Yeah.
So everybody's been really engaged, and apart from, like, there's been a handful of people that have been, vocal as against what we're doing, but it's now because now the success that we've managed to prove, because nobody thought this was even possible. Like, nobody thought that we would be here where we are, 14 years down the line.
I think what's been really instrumental as well is having from the outset, from 2009, Aberdeen City Council have been partners, and that's meant that we've had permission to trap and survey on any council managed land, which has been, incredibly helpful for the project. Without that, there's no way we would have achieved everything that we've achieved today. So that also has been really instrumental, as well as the kind of buy-in from the more general public as well, which again, we wouldn't have got this far without. And yeah, surprisingly little opposition.
Do you think one feeds off the other? The council being involved encourages the public being involved encourages the council.
Yeah.
But for a long time that we were kind of doing things, we're open to a degree, but also shut off to a degree. So we're open that if people reported squirrels to us, we were open that this is what we wanted them to host a trap, ideally. And some people agreed and some people didn't, and that was fine. But the more success that we have, and when red squirrels started to recover, there was more buy-in, and there was more people actually being able to go, oh, well, actually, because there's a lot of people would rather have a squirrel than no squirrels. But then when the red squirrel population really started to bounce back, there was a lot more people were then a lot more engaged to actually carry out our work or host a trap or volunteer for us and stuff. And the buy-in from basically the Aberdeen general public and obviously the council has been huge.
Yeah, huge. That's fantastic. Yeah, it must be very exciting to see reds return.
Yeah.
With your response monitoring, what proportion are reds versus greys? I think you covered
So for last year, it was 35% of all feeders. So there was 5,000 feeder checks, and about a third of those detected red squirrels, and only 2.5% detected grey squirrels. So
brilliant.
My mental arithmetic isn't great, but
no.
a lot less.
What's the source of the funding for your project at the moment?
So we're a nature restoration fund funding. So that's Scottish government at the moment. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Emma, can you search for greys and eliminate breeding greys there as well?
So this is a really good question, and this is what we're trying to do. So we learned from the GPS collar study that the vast majority of drays that are in use in Aberdeen by grey squirrels are in cavities rather than stick drays. And actually, you so rarely see a stick dray at all. There's an abundance of really nice mature trees for squirrels to dray in. That obviously makes it hard, and it means if you're going looking for drays that you need to be relying on something other than your vision, which is where our first plan for using detection dogs comes in, is actually using a dray detection dog, hopefully, that will be able to. So once we will know the areas, like we know the areas that the remaining squirrels are moving in, from our feeders. And from sightings, but then we're hoping to be able to move with the dog as soon as this grey squirrel is detected into that, a general area, and try to narrow down either the tree or the cluster of trees that the live squirrel is in. So the surveys will need to be carried out when grey squirrels are in the dray. So in the summer and autumn would be in the evening times. And then the plan is for us to be able to apprehend that squirrel or those squirrels as they exit the tree cavity.
Those detection dogs are amazing as well when you see them working.
Yeah.
Are there any other cities in Scotland involved or going to be involved in this organised style of eradication of grey squirrels?
So not aware of any other urban eradications in Scotland. That's not to say that in the future, like looking at long-term aims and objectives, if the project is successful in, one of the aims with the nature restoration funding is to move that Highland line further south. It would also make time shorter and easier to manage because it's currently pretty long. And there is the potential, if that is successful. So I think it would be a combination of, landscape level grey squirrel control being really successful in terms of continued targeted trapping, but potentially also pine martens providing some resilience in the landscape too, where you would get to a point that it was worthwhile to start then looking at other urban areas, for example, maybe Dundee, or the likes of that, where you would then focus on eradication from the urban area and continuing to move that boundary, that northern border even further south. It's not going to happen in this next 2 years of funding for sure, but in the long term, why not?
Yeah, watch this space, definitely. Can you confirm that traps with Mink Police trapping alarm systems attached are still checked once per day, despite any notifications?
Yeah, I'll take this. So yeah, so with the Mink Police are Danish, and they are really reliable. We have 100% like support with them. They're amazing. So what we usually have, we have them set so that they check in with us at usually at about 8:30 in the morning, and they check in with us again at about 3:30, 4 o'clock. So that but then also out with, so that the trap doesn't actually need physically checked. The system is checking the trap for us. But then anytime out with those set times, if the alarm goes off, it means that trap then needs to be visited. So it takes the work of having to visit traps daily or twice daily, because the system, the Mink Police unit itself, checks in, and if there's any problem with any of the units, it's all done through the app. The app was an absolute game changer, because it used to be, it was a text message or it was an email or whatever, but it's now everything's done through the app, and you can turn the unit on, you can turn the unit off, you can register catches all through, everything's all done through the app. So
that's fantastic.
Even when it comes to low batteries, occasionally, because we use lithium ion batteries, because the traps are the within the box, it's obviously outside. So the kind of it'll tell you that the battery's low, and usually it's only one battery. So we've got a little battery tester, and we test all 4 batteries. It's just one battery that's usually dead. You swap that out with another battery, and then you're good to go again. So they're massively reliable, and I don't think, without them, we wouldn't be where we are now. I think we would have really struggled, because obviously we've got a limited amount of people that, you know, that kind of check traps and do dispatch. In fact, right now it's only me. So
We're very excited to be welcoming another eradication officer in a few weeks' time, Abby, who's coming over from New Zealand, she's got a good bit of experience working for the Department of Conservation there.
Yeah.
So she's going to be joining us for the last stage of our eradication. Yeah, so we're really excited about that as well.
That would be interesting to learn from their predator-free by 2050, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, in New Zealand. That's great. So if there are any faults with the system, will that flag up on the app that
yeah,
there's
straight away. Yeah,
twice
so
a day it
there's-
checks for
yeah,
faults.
I know.
Sorry, James, we've had a couple of, in the last 4 years, I think this happened twice, where they've had there's been an issue with communication, and before we even communication with the alarms, so before we
Their
even
network.
realize it, they alert us and they're straight onto us going, there's an issue with our communication today. Make sure that you check your traps, which we do, or whatever. But it's always come back into action on the same day. So it's it's been minimal.
What's the sort of cost of the Mink Police system,
expense.
and is it relative to the amount of effort that it reduces?
Yeah, so I think they're about £200 or 180 quid or something per unit.
And then there's the running cost of the SIM cards and the text messages and stuff like that. But it's in terms of the amount of effort that is taken away from us. They're very, very cost effective.
Yeah, no, that's
so
great.
because it used to be that you had to get your own SIM, put your own SIM in it, and then run it that way at the very, very early stages of the unit, and having to go into a Carphone warehouse and ask for a SIM card with just did text messages kind of blew their mind. So they now supply the SIMs, and it's a yearly subscription, and it takes all that faff out. You pay the yearly subscription, and I think it's like €10 or something a year.
Yeah.
Or it might be a bit more expensive than that now, but it takes out all that faff. You just pay them.
Mostly if it's the initial costs that are significant, and then the running costs are much less.
And apart from having to, we've only had to replace one unit that became faulty, and Mink Police, replaced the unit, and then like the lithium ion batteries is basically but it's not like an overall, like it's not a yearly cost as to, it's not a huge cost in comparison to the work that they're basically doing in the background.
Yeah, no, they sound great. Thanks for that. Has the amount of pox-infected red squirrels also decreased with a successful reduction of greys? Did you have squirrelpox issues in Aberdeen?
So thankfully, we have not had squirrelpox virus in Aberdeen City, and we hope that will remain until grey squirrels have been completely removed. So squirrelpox virus didn't come with those that small founding population, thankfully. Yeah.
It's such an odd thing, isn't it? Some things it's in some places and not in others, but it's great that it didn't.
So when they were the accidental release, the accidental escapee, the single event release, we know through the DNA that they came from the New Forest or just outside the New Forest.
Right.
So I think it was more just luck, pure luck than anything else. That when they were moved, none of them had squirrelpox. Like none of the squirrels that they moved had squirrelpox.
Yeah, definitely. Why are pine martens not having a bigger impact on grey squirrels in Angus and along the Highland line?
So in Angus, what I would say is I'm really only familiar with Northeast Angus, which is the area that the Northeast team have been working with very closely. And what we've seen over the last 3 years is actually pine martens going in the south of Aberdeenshire and Northeast Angus going from 0 detections to a lot of detections. So I was just going through actually, so 47 of our feeders in Northeast Angus had pine marten detections last year. which is a lot more than the year before. And what it looks to be is that they're starting to slowly recolonize the area, and that it's probably quite a low number of individuals with very large home ranges that are just kind of settling in the area. You wouldn't expect at that point for there to be any noticeable impact on the population level of grey squirrels, but over time we would hope that that would change.
Brilliant. I think a couple of these questions have been answered in relation to the Mink Police and in your presentation, so I'll just jump on a couple. Do you believe this model could be used in non-red areas for tree and biodiversity reasons?
Absolutely. I mean, we've proved that it works in terms of reducing grey squirrel numbers. Obviously, it's been very obviously beneficial to red squirrels in our area, and that has helped in terms of the acceptability of what we're doing, killing one species to benefit another. I think it would be more challenging to get that kind of buy-in when you don't have red squirrels, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible. And I think there's a lot more education in general needed around the damage that grey squirrels do at a landscape level to biodiversity, and the damage that they have on trees, the decisions that are made over what trees should be planted. It can, depends a lot on grey squirrel presence in the area as well. So I think absolutely it could be used, but there would be a lot more effort involved in ensuring that people understand why it's needed, but definitely doable.
Yeah, and it's around that community, and like you say, communications and community engagement.
Yeah, be so important. Yeah.
Could thermal drones be used to detect those last few remaining greys? I don't know how you detect it, but
the issue with that, right, is that the thermal drones won't. There's red squirrels everywhere, and there's the odd grey squirrel here and there, and the thermal drones, I don't believe, would be able to identify the difference between the two. And certainly if you're trying to survey trees and tree cavities for heat signatures coming out, I don't know, I mean, there will be absolutely no way of telling whether it was a red squirrel dray or a grey squirrel dray.
Brilliant.
Also, there was somebody suggested at a talk that we were at not so long ago about they're developing a drone that can take is it eDNA? Like can take samples from either trees or from the air. I don't actually know, like the science.
I've heard of that air eDNA.
Yeah, the science blows my mind.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing just blows my mind. So
I think like the eDNA is going to be useful for us potentially when we're in the confirmation phase.
Yeah.
So we're looking for any traces in the environment when we're sure after we've removed the last one. I don't know whether it would be useful at this point when we're trying to pinpoint the very last, like we already know there's still grey squirrels left. We already know what part of the environment they're in, and it's actually just trying to literally pin them down. That's the problem.
And I think like most of these things as well, the expense has to come into it too. Like we've already spent, £1.5 million doing what we're doing. So to add something else that's going to probably cost even more, cost the project even more money. So I think we've got to be careful what we actually sign up for. But I mean, like Emma says, maybe in the confirmation, it's maybe going to be worth looking at in the confirmation phase, because if we're going to be picking up eDNA in the air as opposed to anywhere else, then that's probably a system that we should maybe look. Maybe not necessarily a drone, but it's something that we, some sort of sampling.
As well as in the confirmation phase, even just thinking like in the long-term post-eradication monitoring, if there's people doing other studies in the area, be it from the university or any other organizations that are using eDNA to maybe try and get grey squirrels included in this kind of spectrum of species that they're looking for, could be really useful as well, and something that wouldn't add a huge cost to us if it was a little add-on, hopefully.
There's another question about the Mink Police unit, just asking whether it requires phone signal or an internet to work.
Yeah, phone signal.
Yeah.
But
So it
it'll
won't
run.
work in all areas then.
Yeah, but it'll run pretty much on 1 or 2 bars.
I hope any challenges are overcome and this story continues to inspire people what can actually be done with concerted effort, and Aberdeen becomes the Red's only city again, which looks like it's very close. So thanks also to you all for joining us. If you missed our grey squirrel fertility control research webinar during Plant Health Week, then a recording of that and this webinar will soon be made available on the UK Squirrel Accord YouTube channel, where you can subscribe to future videos. But for now, thanks again to Emma and James, and thanks to you all for joining us. And goodbye. Enjoy the rest of Invasive Species Week. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks.